This is the Convict Australia podcast. Thank you for tuning in. It had been an exceptionally bitter, cold winter, with the Thames freezing over with what would be the last of the frost fairs. 200 convict men grudgingly made their way up the gangway. The brisk, dry air and biting wind ripped through them as they shuffled onto the deck before filing down into the gloomy depths of the ship. Letting their eyes adjust to the dark, they peered around the space, taking in what was to be their home for the next few months. When all were aboard, it would take a few more weeks of loading up the vessel with provisions in preparation for its long, arduous journey to the other side of the world before it was ready to leave. The year was 1814. When the weather took on a slightly milder feel towards the end of February, it was decided it was a good time to go. So on the 22nd of February, the Surry, with the Broxbourneberry, alongside with its cargo of over 100 convict women, set sail for New South Wales. As they pulled further and further away from land, the ship ebbed and flowed into a routine. The convict men were divided into 9 groups, with either 20 or 21 men in each. Another 14 men were given duties to perform and were able to move about the ship freely. Each division took turns to come up from below deck, a chance to breathe the fresh, crisp air deep into their lungs and feel the spray on their faces before returning to the bleak, claustrophobic confines down below. During these rotations, their area was washed and fumigated. Vinegar, soap and mustard was issued for cleaning the spaces and themselves. Tuesdays and Fridays were wash days. On Sundays, they were read a divine service and enjoyed their ration of wine. Life on board continued uneventfully until the 7th of March, when the surgeon made a note in his journal of a sure case of typhus, or jail fever as it was commonly termed then. The poor fellow who had succumbed to this horrible disease was a convict by the name of John Stopgood. Typhus is a highly infectious disease that is caused by lice and flea bites. The lice would defecate on the human as it feasted on their skin. The sufferer would scratch the bites and inadvertently get fecal matter into their wound. This bacteria led to headaches, a violent rash of red spots, and a harsh fever. These lice would thrive in dirty, overcrowded areas with people who could not regularly wash themselves or their clothing. Prisons offered conditions that were perfect for the incubation of typhus and thus earned the nickname of jail fever. Typhus often gets confused with typhoid, another common disease for the period. Sufferers of typhoid also experience severe headaches and fever, but they also have stabbing abdominal pain and either diarrhea or constipation. It is brought on by eating or drinking contaminated food or water. 5 days later, on the 12th of March, John Ransom became the first to die on board of the disease, which sadly triggered a ripple effect, with one man dying after the other at an alarming rate. The convicts were now split into 8 divisions and kept to the same rotation. The journals of the surgeon were almost perfunctory, and although there is mention of his attention to fumigating and cleansing the ship, there is no mention of ventilation. At no time were all the convicts let up on the deck at the same time, nor was their bedding brought up on deck for a thorough airing. On the 11th of April, they sailed into Rio de Janeiro, where they stocked up on beef, fruit and vegetables. The captain even brought on board tobacco, coffee and sugar for the convicts to purchase if they had the means. They stayed in Rio for 10 days, then departed on the 21st of April. The fumigation and cleaning continued, but from the 24th of May, all mention of the convicts receiving divine service stops. By this time, the disease had spread from the convicts to members of the crew, soldiers, the captain, and even the surgeon himself. The last recorded death is on the 9th of June, when Aaron Jackson dies of fever, but the deaths continued. The Surry was now in a desperate state. With 12 seamen, 2 mates, and the captain seriously ill, there was no one to navigate her safely to shore. On the 26th of July, the Surry was limping along, hugging the coastline just off the Shoalhaven, when the Broxbourneberry approached. The timing couldn't have been better. A very relieved Thomas Raine, the last standing junior officer, relayed their dilemma and implored Captain Pilcher for assistance. The following day, Mr. Nash boarded the struggling ship and took the reins. Captain Bateson died that same day. Perhaps he had been holding on, but finally succumbed when he knew that the ship was in safe hands. Nash guided the Surry into Port Jackson and anchored on the 29th of July. When authorities took in the state of the convicts, they were shocked to see how sick and dirty they were. When asked why they hadn't washed with soap, the convicts replied, "There was none. It was all expended." The soap was later found with a list of goods for sale. The ship was immediately put into quarantine and the sick sent to camps on the North Shore. The authorities were ready for them. Tents had been set up and every precaution was taken to stop the further spread of the disease. Advertisements were published in the Sydney Gazette warning the public to stay away from the camp, and anyone breaking these rules would be, and I quote, "most severely punished," end quote. On the 13th of August, another announcement was made in the Sydney Gazette that the ship was now free of typhus and was released from quarantine. However, the people who travelled by the Surry wouldn't be released from quarantine for a further 2 weeks. On the 31st of August, they left the quarantine camp and were brought to Sydney. They had left London after a brutal winter, only to arrive in the dead of Australia's winter, cold, weak, and having survived an emotional toll. Governor Lachlan Macquarie employed the services of Surgeon William Redfern to conduct an investigation into the heavy death toll on board the Surry and 2 other ships transporting convicts to Australia at the time. Redfern had been transported to the colonies as a convict, but had earned himself a pardon. He became the trusted family doctor to Macquarie's family. He even helped deliver Macquarie's son into the world, so he was a natural choice for Macquarie to lead the investigation. Redfern looked into their clothing, diet, fresh air, and the care given by the surgeon, and reviewed their journals. He concluded that, and I quote, "The poison was generated by the close confinement of the convicts in the prison. It diffused its malignant influence through every part of the ship and spared none who came within the sphere of its action." End quote. On the 1st of October of that same year, Macquarie wrote to the commissioners of the Transport Board, quote, "The mortality which has been the consequence is very great. 36 convicts died, as also the captain of the ship, the first and second mates, the boatswain and 6 seamen, besides 1 sergeant and 3 privates of the military detachment. In all, 50 persons. I have much reason to apprehend that this destructive disease originated in the mismanagement of 2 of the unfortunate sufferers, namely the captain and surgeon, whose duty it was equally to have caused the convicts to be brought more frequently and in greater numbers on deck than it appears they thought proper to authorise." End quote. And that concludes the sad story of the Surry. On a positive note, Thomas Raine, the junior officer, was promoted to captain and sailed the Surry on 5 more voyages. This horrific experience shaped Raine to become a very caring and responsible captain who treated those in his charge humanely. And for this reason, he earned himself the commendation of Governor Lachlan Macquarie. William Redfern's report also brought about a massive change to the way convicts were treated on their voyage out to Australia, and I will discuss this in more depth in a future episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Convict Australia podcast. If you'd like to show your appreciation and get more involved, there are a number of ways you can. The first is by signing up to Convict Australia on Patreon, and you will get some perks like the Convict Australia newsletter. Secondly, leave a review and tell your friends and family. This really does make a huge difference. And lastly, join the Facebook and Instagram group Convict Australia. All the links I've mentioned will be in the show notes. Thank you again. Till next time.